Welcome viewers. Today we'll speak with Harry Clark about commercial awareness. Harry is a trainee solicitor at Baker McKenzie and he's the founder and the host of the More From Law podcast. So thank you for joining me today, Harry.
Thank you for having me, Remy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome, yeah, and it's an honour to host you as well. So you made a bit of a name for yourself on LinkedIn through your podcast, of course, and the other projects you participated in. But for those who maybe haven't had access to any of your content, could you give them a brief background into yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. So, like you said, I'm a trainee solicitor at Baker McKenzie, sitting within the reorgs department, and for sort of the best part of about 12 months now, or 14 months, I've been trying to help aspiring lawyers break into the profession through a series of social media posts, through my website, through my blog, and more recently with my podcast, More From Law. And I think just the overarching goal has been to try to make something I would have found really useful 2 years before where I am now. So it's a constantly evolving way of trying to think about what students want, what junior lawyers want, and hopefully to continue that forward for as long as I can.
Yeah, that's great. And you're just starting out your career at Baker McKenzie, and there are many law firms across the United Kingdom that you could have chosen. So what were the unique selling points of Baker McKenzie that really attracted you to the firm?
Yeah, of course. I'll try not to make this too salesy, but for me, I was really interested in international element to commercial law, based on my own previous experiences that I'd done through work experience and everything else. And I kind of realised that there's a bit of a spectrum with regards to how international a firm is. You know, on one end you can have, say, a predominantly national firm which might have a few network partnerships with firms around the globe, and some of the work you might do in the London office will have an international element to it, for example. But then right on the other end of the spectrum is where firms like Baker's were, who are, don't rely on any at all, if they do, network partnerships. And now, when you're talking to someone from Amsterdam, it's someone from the Baker McKenzie office or anything else. And also the ability to actually go and practice abroad in those other offices through secondments was really appealing to me. So out of all the reasons, I think it was definitely that international opportunity which really kind of it inspired me to apply there. And then on top of that, I think there was a mix of sort of the smaller trainee intake, the kind of levels of responsibility and focus and training that would imply, the firm's culture and commitment to diversity and inclusion, making a really collaborative workspace was really important to me as well. And just generally the fact that, it's a very full service firm, so that throughout my training contract, if I try some contentious work, I've got the full flexibility to go into non-contentious transactional work on the other side of things and really kind of experiment with everything the firm offers and everything the firm does with all their clients. So probably a mix of all those different things, but definitely the international element was the thing that really stuck at home for me.
Yeah, and that's a really good insight into, some of the reasons that you chose Baker McKenzie over other firms. But are there any sort of secondment opportunities or sectors that you're particularly interested in?
Yeah, of course. I mean, COVID permitting, I would love to do an international comment if I could, especially to America, either in San Francisco or New York, because I just think those are two very big tech and financial sort of hubs to focus on, and that's what really interests me. But I think more generally, as practice areas go, everyone always tells you to keep an open mind. Don't narrow down what your practice area is going to be when you go into it. But if I had to say now, I've put IP tech as my preference seat. I find the world of technology and law really interesting, and seeing how they kind of intersect in the digital space and working for tech companies just really interested me, again, based on my own previous experiences. So at the moment I'm there, but ask me in 6 months, I might have a very different answer for you.
Yeah, so have you always been interested in tech, or is this something that has sort of blossomed from your work with the More From Law podcast?
Probably a bit of both, really. I think as I began to meet more lawyers and gave this networking thing a go and everything else, I kind of increasingly came across these articles of lawyers are going to have to change in this way and learn to code, or lawyers are going to be replaced in 20 years by AI and technology, and probably a bit out of self-preservation and fear more than anything else. I thought I better investigate these claims, and I dabbled a bit with trying to teach myself Python and coding, and looked into all these buzzwords of artificial intelligence and blockchain and everything else. And through that, I began to reach out to lawyers who were practicing in the tech space. And I sort of began to fully appreciate just how broad the world of commercial law is in and of itself, and how something like IP and as a practice area covers almost everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. I feel, especially in this digital age, and certainly I think it's one of the practice areas where it's going to be a real big focus going forward in the future as well. And so I think a combination of previous experiences I've done at work experience and internships, and again based on my conversations I have with other lawyers, I think it just seems like a really dynamic, forward-thinking and interesting area of law that I just have found really interesting to kind of peruse to, even if it's just on my own time rather than actual practice. Yeah.
Fantastic, and I think this is a good time to segue into the topic of this podcast, which is commercial awareness. So many people will have heard the term commercial awareness bandied about, and students may know that it's an important sort of skill to have and to develop over the course of your time at university. But what actually is commercial awareness, and why is it important for students to develop?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really underemphasized in the curriculum of becoming a lawyer, both through LLB or GDL and the LPC and so on. And it's only through my conversations with other lawyers who are practicing before I've entered the profession that it's really been drilled into me as this really key skill to kind of be aware of. And I think that story of it being important was best evidence when I spoke to someone who was the head of what was the RBS legal department and who was responsible for going out and choosing which law firms he wanted to work with, and was responsible for making sure that him in his in-house client position could ensure that he was getting value for money from his lawyers and everything else. And he said very, very kind of bluntly, but very kind of truthfully, that if a trainee on a given transaction, or any kind of lawyer for that matter, is not kind of aware of the broader commercial objectives as to what this business is trying to do, be it through acquiring another company or through restructuring this way, then it would really affect the advice that they do and their awareness of everything else that's going on in the transaction. And in the worst cases, it's just a phone call to say that, in all honesty, I don't think Harry's appreciating this as a trainee, and we want to work with someone else. Hopefully, that doesn't happen through my TC. But no, it's a really fundamental part, especially of being a lawyer, in terms of your practicing skill set. It's critical to what you do. I think that the emphasis throughout law school and throughout the LPC and LLB and everything else is satisfying the legal test components of being a lawyer. So based on what the black letter law says, X, Y, and Z are our available options here. But being a commercial lawyer, particularly, or whenever you're working with a client for that matter, it's not just enough to go to the client and say, look, section 40 of this act says this, and you're on your own. They want you to be a more commercial business advisor, and increasingly the amount of work that law firms are doing is not just legal service provision, but more a kind of mixed myriad of business provision and helping them with their decision making. So instead, you need to satisfy this commerciality test of saying, okay, well, these are the options on the table, but based on my clients' given factors, based on their industry, based on their budget, based on their time, based on everything else that's going on around the world at the moment, this is what I think is better or worse in terms of the options that we have available here. And that's how I'm going to use my judgment, my commercial awareness, to take account for the context of my client in their decision making and helping them out in that way. So it's absolutely critical to being a lawyer, and particularly as a trainee. There is so much more than the black letter law trainee tasks that will come up to mind, like bundling and researching and due diligence and everything else, both from a commercial awareness perspective, but also increasingly throughout everything else that a firm will do internally. So their business development, their marketing, their graduate recruitment, and their pro bono and CSR responsibilities as well. There's a lot more to being a trainee than just the kind of initial research tasks that you might have convinced yourself of during university as well.
Yeah, and you sort of raised the point that the black letter law is obviously useful and important for solicitors to have a good grasp of, but commercial awareness and understanding the business environment is equally important. So do you think maybe a business degree would be better for a lawyer than an actual law degree? Do you think this is the case or not?
That's a really interesting question, and it's probably reflective of the reason why a lot of firms like to recruit from diverse backgrounds in terms of your education, because people want diversity of thought and your problem solving and everything else as much as they do, ensuring that you know what the law is. And if you haven't reached that level because you've been a non-law candidate, then you've got the GDL, you've got the LPC, and you've got your departmental training to kind of boost you up to speed for that. So, it's really interesting. There's a survey of kind of senior partners and decision makers, and they've said that I think it's more than 70% would take a 2-1 candidate who had some form of business experience, like you mentioned, or commercial awareness, over a comparable candidate who had a first and didn't have that experience. Simply because I think if you can show that initiative of being commercially aware and developing those skills early, saves the law firm a lot of time of trying to drill it in as important to you later on in your trading. So, yeah, I don't know about a blanket enforcement of everyone needs to have a business degree, but if you've got an understanding of business in any capacity, I think that's only going to be beneficial for your career.
And just to bring it back to yourself, were there any sources that you found particularly useful in developing your own commercial awareness? And are there any that you would recommend to students who may be in that stage where they need to develop their commercial awareness?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to think of this is that obviously commercial awareness is a skill and a perspective about how you're going to analyze a given story or scenario. But I think more than anything, it's a real habit that you have to teach yourself and learn to do on a daily or weekly basis. And I think the best way to figure out how you're going to do that is to actually take a look at how you're currently getting your news information and your current day-to-day habits. So, for example, if you're someone who uses Twitter a lot in your personal life, one of the things that I did when I was looking to, and I still do, but albeit with a separate account now, when I was looking to learn more about the sort of commercial world, was to create lists where I could have a list of, say, 50 to 100 people who were news reporters, news outlets, or thought leaders, influencers, people who were academics, critiquing the law and everything else, and create a list on my Twitter account, which was separate to my main feed that I was getting with every other piece of information. So I could really clearly discern between personal life stuff that I'm just doing when I'm bored or anything else, versus this is all my commercial awareness stream of information just coming into me. And obviously, the great thing about Twitter is it's a little bit of a mix of opinion and up-to-date information at the same time, so you can get a variety of viewpoints about what's going on. In addition to that, I think there's a host of services out there, especially now in COVID-19, that will synthesize all of the reading that you might traditionally have to do on the Financial Times or all these news sites yourself, and deliver it straight into your inbox. So Little Law, the Business Update, Watson's Daily. There's a host of student-run and company-run initiatives which are there and designed to kind of summarize the day-to-day news in a weekly or daily newsletter, which is, again, a really useful way to cut out some of the administrative workload. And then finally, I think there's more to commercial awareness than just being aware of the news and everything that's going on. I think you need to be aware of the changes which are happening inside your own industry as well, and how you're going to contribute in your own role. And the best way I found to do that was to listen to people talk about what they did and their thoughts and feelings. So, podcasts, interviews, blog posts, especially from people whose job it was to consult or otherwise seek to change the legal profession, like consultants or charity workers or people who've driven social initiatives, because they have a really good outside looking in perspective on where the law currently is on a given topic and how they want it to change going forward. And I think just having that in the back of your mind in your role as a lawyer is a good, healthy amount of self-awareness to have.
Yeah, and I think it's very useful to speak about the concept of commercial awareness, but it's equally important to discuss commercial awareness in a practical sense. Mm-hmm. So if it's okay with you, we'll just go through a few commonly asked questions in law firm applications and provide any insight or advice you have for anybody who needs to actually tackle these questions. So the first one I have written down is, why do you want to work for an international commercial law firm?
Yeah, good question. I think why law is given on any application form. And the way I tried to do this in my applications was to almost try and tell a story. So I'm going to start with a really broad question of, why am I even wanting to be a lawyer in the first place? What is it that's fundamental to being a lawyer? Problem solving, research, meeting clients, and anything else that I find interesting, and how have I come to that conclusion through my experiences or my reading and using those as evidence. And then I think over time, you sort of want to develop your cover letter or your writing so that it sort of funnels, and you go from this really broad question of why law through to, how's that then developed through trial and error to commercial law, and then why commercial law with an international element, as you say. And then even further, why commercial law with an international element that offers secondments or offers this very unique opportunity. And I think if you can structure it in the right way, and you can obviously kind of change the middle as you go through this funding process, the end point you should arrive at is where the recruiter is absolutely convinced that this application has been written for this specific firm, and that you've given evidence to kind of back up that viewpoint. And so, yeah, I think that kind of general storytelling kind of approach to that sort of why question is a good way to give your application a bit of personality, and also hopefully demonstrate your experience at the same time as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach the question, and you can maybe call it the funnel strategy.
Yeah, I've not trademarked it yet, but something along those lines. Yeah.
So the next one we have is, why this firm? So it might be Baker McKenzie. In your case, it might be there are loads of other firms that may ask this question, but why this firm?
Yeah. So again, I think using that funnel as a structure, and then the specifics of how you tell what might appear to be like firms apart. And this was something that I, in hindsight, really struggled with in my second application cycle, was I would get down to the detail of why I want to do commercial law with international element, but then I kind of stopped there and realized that definition alone fits like 90% of all firms in London. It's such a huge part of what a lot of commercial law firms do. So I think at this point you have to get into some of those kind of more unique or complementary factors, like I mentioned at the very beginning when we were talking about Baker's, like the trainee intake or the sense of responsibility and the culture and everything else. And I think the best ways to identify this is when you're kind of going through the process, and hopefully before you've gotten to the application cycle stage of your beginning, you've begun to speak to lawyers and you've begun to get an idea of what commercial lawyers do. And in doing so, you can write down a list of, say, 10 characteristics of this is what I want in my quote unquote dream firm. And, number one is immovable. It has to have this very thing, or I'm not even going to bother applying. It's commercial, or it has secondments or anything else. And then I kind of listed rank of, say, 9 other unique selling points, which are devised in a way where you say, okay, the first, say, 4 are going to be really critical. I really want those to be there, right down to the outright trivial. They've got a tiki bar on the 4th floor and everything else. So that's kind of, I think, how I would structure it on paper. And then when it came to my research, I was just looking for firms which fit that profile and always, scored them in a way of saying this is how closely they relate to what I want to do. And so when it comes to answering that why this firm question, you can hopefully give some really specific initiatives and examples of how your research you've gone through and satisfied not just those initial 3 points, which are going to apply to a lot of law firms, but more down to the detail where, other firms might have this other USP that you've mentioned. But when you've gotten down to enough detail and you've bundled them all together in your answer, only one firm is going to have that combination of all those unique factors and of everything that they can offer as well.
Yeah, and another question which may be similar, but it might have a different, way you need to approach it, is why do you want to be a commercial solicitor?
That's a good question. I like this question because I think it always kind of starts with that spark of when you first try law and when you kind of first get an idea as to what lawyers do. And I think certainly in my cover letters, which were more successful, the best things I tried to do at each opportunity was to reflect and to reflect on experiences which weren't even necessarily on paper remotely connected to the world of law. So, my experiences in retail, or I did a placement in family law for a week and what that was like, reflecting on the things I did and didn't like. And doing so in a way which lended itself to commercial law practice. So, I really did like the fact I could sit down with clients and try and help them with a problem and do the research and all the interpersonal skills. But, the emotional subject matter of family law perhaps wasn't for me, and that led me to try the commercial side of things and so on. So I think, again, tell a bit of a story, but don't be afraid to reflect on things which on face value at least might not seem like they relevantly apply to commercial law, because a lot of the underlying skills and kind of experiences you'll have definitely will. So retail and sales, extracurricular activities and teamwork, volunteering and resilience and everything else will all fit into the package of skills that a lot of commercial law firms will look for. And it's just about making sure you can use the breadth of those experiences and reflect along the way to give a broad variety of your experiences and your skill sets, really.
Yeah, and you provided some very useful advice into those 3 questions, which may be stereotypical or traditional in law firm applications. But the next one is probably a new one one that law firms may look at because of COVID, obviously, and the challenges and opportunities that COVID bring. So the question is, what challenges and opportunities do you see any sector in this firm facing over the next 24 months?
That's a really good question. I think when it comes to selecting a sector, in the same way when it comes to selecting a news story you're going to talk about, that's another common application one. Pick something which really interests you, because you're going to have to talk about this at some length. And the more naturally interested you are in this, the more it will just come across in your answer and how you're delivering it in the application, in the assessment center, for example. So for me, if I was to pick a sector that I was interested in, I think that it's going to have a lot of opportunities and potential difficulties over the next coming months of COVID, would be esports and gaming. I like video games. I love playing them. And, the huge movement that we've seen in this sector over the last 5 to 10 years, from traditional disc formats being sold in stores and kind of doing everything very old school and physical, through to this abundance of streaming services, not just people streaming themselves playing games, but you, the actual player themselves, streaming the game from the cloud and playing without, disk drives and everything else. It's just really fascinating to me. And the fact that this has grown where it's comparable to the movie industry, if not surpassing it in some cases and some records, I think is a fantastic sector to start to look at. Especially when you look at opportunities, this next generation of consoles coming up, for example, and they're priced at a very competitive rate for what they can offer, especially like the cheapest ones. I think the Xbox is like $249, which is a lot of money, but for comparatively to what it offers and other consoles in its market, it's not a lot. And the reason that really got me so excited and that I kind of looked at that and thought, wow, that's really interesting, is because India and a lot of these developing economies are really starting to embrace, particularly mobile gaming because of the kind of low barrier of entry. But all of these kind of streaming services which are being offered, and there's a lot of big movements starting to happen where companies are looking to places like India and China as these esports centers for the future. And the amount of money that I think is going to be poured into these investments is going to be really significant. And obviously with COVID, everyone's stuck at home, and that kind of medium for an audience of what you want is almost perfect for this industry. So I certainly think that's one really huge opportunity in that regard. I guess a disadvantage would be the kind of moral problem, I guess, that the games have struggled with in a little way with their loot box system and the kind of run-ins they've had in with the law with regards to gambling and all of the kind of comparisons that have been drawn to pokers and casinos when video game developers and publishers put in these mechanics to pay money when you don't know exactly what you're getting out at the end of it. And following that end of regulation has been really interesting, and seeing how the fact that one company, as in Germany, has one decision handed down to it will affect the rest of the industry and everything else. So yeah, again, that's an example, a very worked example of how a given sector can face difficulties and kind of opportunities within this world of COVID. Within the world of law, and I guess to every other business, I guess the main talking point is everyone's working from home. I think the one story that's really amazed me the most is, we've been in lockdown now for 6 or 7 months. And in that time, there's been firms both in the UK and around the world which have decided to go fully remote as a result of this. So, the fact that business practice has been relying on offices and doing things the old-fashioned way, is another way to put it, for the last 10, 20, if not more years. And then this one situation comes along and they try it for 6 months and they say, you know what, actually, we can do all this virtually and remotely. We don't need these overheads with the offices. It's just absolutely mind-boggling to me. And there's hundreds and thousands of examples of companies going through all kinds of that transformation right now as a result of this new working style that we're all in. So certainly an interesting time to be an interviewer, because my God, the questions you're going to get asked about are potentially limitless. But anyway, those are some examples of probably what I would talk about on my own personal basis.
Yeah, not necessarily related to the question, but I'd just like to hear your personal opinion. Would you welcome this sort of drive to working from home, or do you think it's better for both employees and the employer to work in the actual offices like they used to?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, you save on the commute. I don't think anyone's missing the 7 a.m. Central Line rush being packed in like sardines, for sure. And it's been really interesting. I've seen surveys, I think, and studies in the US when it comes to working from home. This was pre-pandemic. And it really depends on the culture and uptake by the given company and the given set of employees. Because if everyone is working remotely, including the decision makers, the big bosses, and everything else, there is very little to no impact in terms of who gets passed over for promotions and who progresses within a company or anything else like that. But conversely, if the partner or the decision maker and everyone else is working in the office and a select few people are in and out of the office a lot of the time, it really can have a difference. But based on our own, capacity as human beings to see people, recognize what they're doing, see them typing away at a keyboard and inferring that that's working, versus the kind of digital equivalent of sending an email to someone, waiting 8 hours, and then getting a piece of work back, and not being able to self-verify it yourself in terms of seeing them working in the office. So for me personally, I think a healthy balance of about a 50-50 would probably be what I'd want to do, particularly as a junior person, and particularly given the fact I've just started my new role. I want to meet people and see them beyond just the confines of Zoom. And from what I can tell, the vast majority of lawyers are also kind of looking for that uptake, because I don't think anyone's missing the Central Line commute anytime soon.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to hear insight into sort of working from home and the previous questions as well. But just the final question, the final application question, which may be quite common for applicants to face, is what is the relationship between business and law?
I think personally, they're you cannot separate them. I mean, like any other business, a law firm, unless they're doing charitable pro bono work or that's their kind of main initiative, has to make money. And I think law firms particularly are fascinating study based on this billable hour model that they work along, and how they kind of provide their solutions to their clients. And like we said, with COVID, that whole situation is beginning to be turned on its head, as with technology, in terms of how firms are delivering their services, both in a capacity of in-person versus virtual, and also with their fee arrangements and what clients are expecting as well. I think as a trainee and as a lawyer going forward, I think it's really important to think of yourself as a business person of the firm, and to recognize that, when you're starting out in a graduate role as a trainee or anything else, you're going to be doing the very legal tasks of the due diligence, of the research. But as you progress to partner level, or as you progress within the seniority of a firm, your role changes somewhat from practicing as a lawyer to almost practicing as a partner, a business person of this firm, and going out and winning clients and really developing not just a name for yourself, but a real business case for yourself, and working client relationships which you can demonstrably say to the firm are worth X amount in value, and that this is what you bring in. So, it's always interesting to see whenever you see firms hiring laterally from others, and kind of the partner agreements they do, because in almost every single press release they'll always say, I'm hiring this person because they have fantastic links with these types of companies, or they are an expert in this given sector. So lawyers are somewhat unique, I think, in that regard, in that they are expected to not just be experts in the subject matter of what they do, but also as business people to have that network and those relationships with their clients where they can say, this is attributable to what I do and who I am, and this is how I bring in what I do for the firm, and so much more than just the due diligence and the research and everything else that you would do as a trainee.
Yeah, I think those points about solicitors also having to have a knowledge of business and acting as a sort of business person is quite useful for students and graduates to know. But in terms of commercial awareness, do you think having a strong understanding of mathematics is like a component of commercial awareness, or do you think it's not necessarily relevant for commercial solicitors to have this skill?
I can't tell you the number of times that people say I want to be a lawyer because I hate maths, but I think that mathematics is useful. I think if anything, I'd say economics and business is particularly useful, regardless of whatever area of law you go into, because it'll give you an understanding of how the work you do in one given transaction will be used to then be passed on to a client, and how the firm internally is running as a business structurally. So I think economics is certainly very useful. An area of critical thinking and just being able to look at the way that the firm currently conducts their business and questioning how it's done and the best ways to be efficient, even just in your own world of shortcuts and everything else in terms of your own working style, with technology. No, I think, any kind of additional knowledge you can bring in beyond just your blacklisted legal knowledge is going to be welcomed by a lot of firms, whether that's math-wise, economics-wise, tech-wise, or even languages. Like I said, there's a lot more to being a trainee and a lawyer than just the typical research task, and anything else that you can bring to the table will surely be welcomed by a firm.
Yeah, and I certainly have heard a lot of people speak about, I wanted to go into law because I wasn't really good at maths, and which, you're not expected to have good math skills in. But yeah, hearing your views about having strong, at least economical or economic, understanding is very, very useful for a commercial solicitor. But we've come to the end of our sort of discussion, and we've discussed commercial awareness and the sort of theoretical aspect of it, and then how you answer questions relating to these these areas in an actual application. But just if anybody wants to learn more about you or your podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, of course. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Harry Clark, and most other social media, and my blog at Harry Clark Law. Nice imaginative name. And you can listen to the More from Law podcast on iTunes and Spotify, where you can hear from recruiters, CEOs, and people like that directly about what it is that they look for in the next wave of legal talent as well.
Fantastic. Well, I'll speak to you later. And have a good day.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for having me.